You are watching The Burning Power Show with Dr. Sonny Alonzo Dotson, where you are therefore required to love yourself. You are welcome here, you are wanted here, and you are needed here. And to the very last ember that's been diluted in the airs of possibility, trust yourself, need yourself.
I come into agreement with the supreme good of heaven. I am seated in heavenly places with Christ Jesus. Therefore, war from this plane and realm. I declare that the anointing of God breaks every yoke, open every portal, and assign angels to reinforce me as I advance into new levels, new dimensions, new realms, and territories. Let there be a breakthrough in the heavens. I tap into apostolic and prophetic veins. I shatter glass ceilings. I smash spiritual bars and iron membranes. I declare a breakthrough atmosphere is established. I recalibrate the spiritual climate and decree that every bit of lukewarmness must be replaced with the fire and the zeal of God. Baptize me with the Holy Ghost and with fire. Let there be fire in my mouth as I advance in this prayer. I take authority over demonic satanic atmospheres and climates created by cultic activities, destiny altering images, incantations, ill-spoken words, witchcraft, hostile environments, fear, terrorism, racial, ethnic hatred, violence. In the name of Jesus, I command that the spiritual climate to shift, economic climate shift, social climate shift, cultural climate shift, educational climate shift, political climate shift, ecclesiastical climate shift. I command that the atmosphere must be filled with the glory of God. Father, fill the atmosphere, fill the environment with your glory. I alter this environment and declare it is now suitable for my ministry to thrive, my relationships to thrive, my children to thrive, my loved ones to thrive, my business to thrive, my ideas to thrive, my nation to thrive, my government to thrive, my economy to thrive. I establish a supernatural environment for miracles to occur. I war in the name of Jesus and by his shed blood, which is the shed blood of the Lamb that was slain before the foundations of the world. By him, hallelujah, evil must be destroyed. For this reason was the Son of God made manifest, that he would destroy the works of the darkness. I decree and declare the works of darkness is destroyed. I decree every curse over my life is reversed. I break through prevailing and sustaining powers of darkness over this region in the name of Jesus. I arrest every demonic spirit through your word. Empower the angelic host to war in my behalf. I resist territorial strongholds. I sever.
All right, welcome on in, everybody. You are now watching The Burning Power Show, where you are therefore required to love yourself. And I am Dr. Sonny Alonzo Dotson. And I am getting on tonight for today's show, which is going to be a continuation of the Spiritual Confinement series. And we are going to be talking about tonight the second area of penetration, which is going to be on the topic of the spirit of persecution. So once again, we are definitely on the Spiritual Confinement series, and we are working with area of penetration 2, which is going to be the spirit of persecution. And as I stated before, I do want to give information about where the series is going. And then I want to give some information that I want to clear up about the previous episode for intellectual purposes. So there are going to be a number of 8 areas of penetration for this series. I am going to be doing shows that are pertaining particularly to this subject, which is the area of the spiritual confinement that we face. which is thus why I have created the Spiritual Confinement series. And my last show was the first show that was going to be an episode regarding the 8 areas of penetration, which was the spirit of desolation. And now this is episode 2 of the Spiritual Confinement series, and we are dealing with area of penetration persecution and the spirit of persecution as it relates to our experience of being in the spiritual confinement experience. So I want to make that clear that we are talking in terms of getting through experiential and existential areas that are pertaining to the spirit, and what it means to be getting through now as it relates to the spirit realm. So I want to make sure that I'm getting clear to people what I'm talking about, and where we are going as it relates to the topic that I'm discussing. I will be creating material for each show to get prepared for where we are going in the spirit realm, as we are allowing ourselves to re-narrate our history and rewrite the playwright of our now. And now we are getting an understanding as we go through our lives, which is, one of the facets of this show, that we are willing to spend time with ourselves and reevaluate what it means to really be navigating through our psyche, and what it means to really be in the pursuit of rediscovering our consciousness. And that's what this is all about, and that's what this show is about. Getting into the awarenesses of our psyche and the pursuits of our psyche that we had not seen before. And so, now that I've talked about that briefly, I do want to talk about last show and the intellectual material that I prepared for that show as it relates to the desolation experience and the spirit of desolation. As I stated in that show, there will be an area of penetration, which there are 8, and there are going to be 8 shows. This is show 2, and in those areas of penetration, there are going to be what I have termed, excuse me one second while I review my notes here. There are going to be what I have termed the PCs of the experience. So the PCs of the experience are the paramount constituents. And I want to clarify, on the last video, I did pronounce that constituents, and I would want to give my apologies about that. I don't want to be playing the tomato and tomato game with you guys, because this is very serious to me, in the pursuit of the freeing of the consciousness of others and getting people out of the bondage of spiritual pain. That is definitely the purpose to the pursuit of everything that I do, and helping others to see into the consciousness and the psyche that they had not been able to see before. And I want to give people a clear root as to the reasoning behind the pain, and a clear root as to the reasoning of the premise behind everything that we are going through. Not just a solution or a conclusion to what's happening, but an actual raw truth and an actual finding of a truth based on the roots that we are prepared to take now. And so I just want to be clear that this is very important work to me as it relates to helping other people. And I don't care what time I have to do it or anything like that. But getting back to that clarity, I just wanted to clarify that there will be an area of penetration, and then there will be what I have termed the PCs, which are the key components, the key elements of the experiential, existential journeys that we are on. We are not calling them warfare, Although there is a lot of warfare that we are facing in the journey, but it is definitely a journey that we are on. And we have to understand that we are in the processing of God. And we are in the processing because we are in the journey, and we have to go through the journeys so that we can learn how to deal with the anguish and the sorrow that we must face, and the anguish and the sorrow that we are required to give back to God in order for us to get into a portal that he would open to give us clarity about our lives. And so, thus, with that being stated, I do want to get into the clarity of what I'm talking about, and then that next topic, because now that we have an understanding that there is an area of penetration, and there will be the PCs, which are the paramount constituents. And what that means is they are key components, and they are key elements to the penetration that God is trying to provoke us with. So there is the provoking of the spirit that God is trying to do for us and give us clarity. And all that paramount constituent means is that they are the most important. They are the most important elements of the required spiritual work that we face. And that's what paramount means. It's the most important, the supreme knowledge. And that's why they are called paramount constituents. Constituent means that it is a member of something. It is an element of something. So that's why it is called a paramount constituent. So I want to break that down, and do give my apologies about the mispronouncing of that word on the last video. Because, as I said, I'm not in the tomato business. I'm in the business of getting you a real understanding and a real knowledge about what's happening in your spirit. And so let's move on. I want to move on to the actual topic of the show, which is the second installment to the spiritual confinement series. And that is the spirit of persecution. So I want to give us a breakdown of what it means to actually be living in spiritual confinement as it relates to the spirit of persecution. So I have defined this for us, and I have given a spiritual definition to what is happening to us as it relates to the spirit of persecution. And what that means is that it is the persistent hostility towards self, ill treatment towards self, performed by psychological harassment and mental annoyance. Annoyance with self, annoyance within. So we are facing the persistent hostility that we are willfully placing upon ourselves, which would be called the self-induced pain, and then the ill treatment of ourselves, inwardly, and then which would be the malnutrition of our spirits. And then it is performed, how it is done, how we are doing it to ourselves, is through psychological harassment. So we are literally harassing ourselves with ill thoughts, ill treatment of our spirits. And we are literally facing hostility towards ourselves. And we are doing this every day while we are in the experience of the persecution of ourselves. And it is through also the mental annoyance, because now at this point, we are literally an annoyance to ourselves. And so, just to touch base on what I talked about prior in one of the shows, is that we have to understand that anything that is happening in the spirit with us, Satan, like as I said before, is in the business of utilizing us as the driving force and the defining fault and the blame to our destruction and downfall. So that's we have to understand that as we're working through this journey, we're getting an understanding of self and the essential self and the defining self and the infinite self and the immortal self, the eternal self, which would be our spirit, the pneuma, the psyche, the consciousness, the ego. All of that we're getting into, because we're getting into the inner man. We're not talking in terms of the pseudo representation any longer. So we're digging deeper. And so as we get to, now that we have a spiritual working definition for the spirit of persecution, and we understand that we are working with the hostility that we are facing within, as we are operating as a host for Satan in the spirit, as it relates to the earth realm heart and the earth realm experience. I want to break that down. It is the hostility inside, the anger that resides in us, the bitterness that resides in us, the harboring of hate that resides in us, hostility, the ill treatment of ourselves. When we are refusing to become whole and we are refusing to do the required work that we need to do in order to face ourselves. And then we are definitely doing this by the continual and habitual lies that we are telling ourselves. And we are doing this through the self-distortion and the detachment from self that we are continuing to live by. And we are doing that every day, that we continue to cope through life instead of soar through life. We're doing that every day that we make the decision that we are not going to choose the experiences that are going to align us with where we are called to go, versus where Satan would have us die in the womb of his beliefs. Every day that we're choosing decisions that are not allowing us to obtain peace as we are in the pursuit of where we're going. That is a day that we are continuing to allow ourselves to harbor ourselves inside of the womb, the celestial womb of Satan. Because we have to understand that we are in the fight of principalities. We are in the fight of regions. We are in the fight of wars that we have not seen. It is what thou hast not seen, not what thou can see. So we have to understand that this is very serious in this hour. And I am on here in the pursuit of the freeing of people's consciousness. Because we have to understand that we are required to be about the business of loving ourselves back to life. And I don't want to get off topic, so let me get out of, because I don't want to take too much of you guys' time on this show tonight. But now that we have the understanding of the spiritual definition that I have created for your understanding of, as it relates to the spirit of persecution, and we understand that per the area of penetration, there will be 5 key components, also known as what I have defined the paramount constituents, which are the supreme knowledge, the supreme areas and elements of knowledge that we need to get in this particular journey. And so I want to go ahead and get down to the first PC, which is the paramount constituent that we need to face, which is number 1, oppressional control. So I want to make clear that we want to get an understanding as it relates to being confined in the spirit, and as it relates to being imprisoned in the spirit. We're having to get an understanding of the realities of what we're facing. And the realities of that is understanding Satan's operational power and existence in our reality. So we have to understand that this is an awareness that we are required to gain as it relates to the power of this hour. Because we have to understand the premise, as I always say in every show, and particularly these shows as it relates to the spiritual confinement series, that we have to understand where it is that God would have us gain penetration into. And if he is going to allow us penetration into that area, he is allowing us entrance into a vision of where it is exactly that Satan is trying to harm us. So I want to make this clear as I break down the penetration process. God is in the business now in this hour of allowing us to see the severity of the areas that Satan is trying to work on inside us. So he is allowing us to see exactly where it is that Satan is trying to get and infiltrate and betwixt within us. Because as I told you on the show before, that Satan is about the betwixting and getting in between what's going on. And so let me break down the operational control, which is number one of the paramount constituents. And he is going to be trying to hinder us by the cruel and unjust treatment to oneself and others. So that's number one of the operational control that Satan is trying to have over us. It is through the cruel and unjust treatment of ourselves first, and then being about the pursuit of the cruel and unjust treatment of others. So we have to understand that if we don't love ourselves enough to treat ourselves well and do the work required to gain knowledge about who we really are, not what we've been believing, and not who we believed when we were growing up, and not the representation of who we are now as it relates to society and societal terms and expectations of the world and all of that. We're talking about who we really are inside. And if we're going to get to who we really are, we have to include the psyche and the consciousness. Because that is a very vital part to the mind and the soul and the spirit. And so that's number one of the operational control. Number two of the operational control is the fact that he is about the business, Satan, or Lucifer. He is about the business of enslavement of the mind through spiritual suppression. So he is trying to suppress our spirits at this point of the journey. Because we are not in the desolation of the spirit anymore. We are now at the part of the journey where we are at the spirit of persecution. So everything is about the persecution of us, the judgment of us, the damnation of us. So he is about the business of enslaving the mind. So, what that means is now that we have become imprisoned in the spirit, now we are literally a slave to the imprisonment of our spirit. And we have to understand that we are doing this to ourselves. So I want to get that awareness out there, that we are doing this. Not somebody, not a circumstance, not a situation, not some grandiose scheme that we've created that we're choosing to believe, not some hype, not some ego-based characteristic, not some coping mechanism, any of that, none of that. We ourselves, the inner man, the inner parts of us are doing this. So as we have now, as I stated on the last show, in the first phase, the first area of penetration, that we are at that part of the journey, we are already imprisoned. And now at this part of the journey, Satan is about the business of enslaving us to that imprisonment. by way of spiritual suppression. So he is trying to suppress the willpower, the yearn power, the desire power of God. Because remember, as I told you before, it's all about the propositioning and then turning it around into the enslavement of the doctrine of Lucifer. To the point where we're literally spiritually chained, whipped, and bound at this point. Because now our spirits are suppressed. So I need you to get that in this hour. And then, sorry, something's happening with the computer. It was showing me some type of error message, but that's okay. And then, so that was number 2, as it relates to the experience of the operational control. Or, excuse me, oppressional control. And then we get to number 3 of the oppressional control, because he is in the business of oppressing us so that we can become an oppressed people with the feeling of no power. We are now becoming powerless. And number 3 to the part of the oppressional control is spiritual exploitation. So he is about the business of spiritually exploiting us as we are in the experience of the imprisonment and the enslavement of Lucifer, which is the enslavement of ourselves by our own work. Because, as I told you, Satan is not about the business of doing anything himself. He's going to use you to do it. And so, spiritual definition for the defining of spiritual exploitation. It is an attempt or the attempting to benefit from us through the hindering of our work in God. So that, what else could be exploitation? He is working through us by the hindering of our work in God. Okay, and then we move on to number 4, as it relates to the experience of the oppressional control. It is through spiritual despotism. And somebody's asking, what is spiritual despotism? It is absolute power over our spirits by way of oppression. So at this point, as he has worked his way all through the betwixting of our spirits, now he is seeking to have absolute power over our spirits through spiritual despotism, which means to have absolute power. And he is seeking that through the oppression of us. Sorry, I had to press that again. Okay, so we've got those key components that we are being oppressed. We are in the oppressional control of Satan. As it relates to him giving us the crown of that pursuit. Because as I've stated, it is our fight. And we are the ones responsible. And so, and then once he's done that, he's about the business of enslaving us in the imprisonment of the entrapment of our spirits, as it relates to the confinement of our spirits. And once he has enslaved us, he is about exploiting us. And everything that we do, whether it's gossiping about people, or trying to use people, or trying to, hinder someone from getting where they need to go, hindering ourselves from getting where we need to go, depression, anxiety, anything that's going on that is not the divine will of God for your life is an exploitation of your spirit. So I really need you to hear this. Anything that's ailing you or aiding in the ill treatment of yourself is an exploitation. It is spiritual exploitation. And that is a powerful awareness and a true postulate right now in this hour that we need to get. Spiritual exploitation. And after he continuously exploits us, he is then about the business of getting complete absolute power through the oppression of us. And that is through spiritual despotism. And so let's move on to PC number 2, which is going to be paramount constituent number 2. And that is self-victimization. So Satan is in the business of infiltrating us once he believes that he has absolute power, which is the practicing of spiritual despotism. Now he is in the business of utilizing us for the pursuit of self-victimization. We are literally victimizing ourselves. So we have to understand at this point, for the layman's terms breakdown of the self-victimization as it relates to the confinement of the spirit, we have to understand that literally we are dwelling in the energy of victimization. So we don't even have to, anything that anybody that's doing to us externally, it's all coming from us within. So if you're being beat down and you're being treated bad, it's through the self-victimization experience. Because at this point, there is no one to blame. Because we are, anything that's happening to us externally is a representation of our inner experience of ourselves. Are you hearing that part? So if someone's using you, you have to understand that your spirit is literally asking them to victimize you. Because you're in the business of self-victimization. So, and then to break that down further, as it relates to the self-victimization, number one of the self-victimization experience, as I have created and termed, there will be a systematic self-torment. So there is the systematic approach of self-torment that we face. So we are in the business of tormenting ourselves. And this is through the mind. And this is through the psyche, or the pneuma. Which the pneuma comes through the breath. So we have to understand that the very aspect or definition of pneuma is the breath. And what is the breath of life? It is life. It is the spirit. And that's why we have a lot of people out here, including myself at one point. You're going all around. You're going through the whole life experience, with false expectations and wanting to, come up with your own explanation about how life is supposed to go. Right? This is what we do. We tell ourselves that we've got it all planned out and things are going to work out exactly the way we want them to work. Well, I can tell you the short version of insanity for me. When I started out in life, I started out very naive. I believed all the hype and all those little facade movies that they used to play. Oh, everything's going to be, everything's going to be so wonderful. And everything's going to be so great. Everybody's going to be so nice. Remember all that, And so I got out here, and guess what? I did just like everybody else, and I had a whole list of expectations and a whole array of needs that I was expecting someone else to fulfill in the pursuit of my life. And guess what that ended up being? It ended in the conclusion of me being hurt, which would conclude further to the fact of me administering to myself self-induced pain, which would equate to what? Guess what? Watch this. Self-torment. Systematic self-torment, if we might add. Because what is systematic self-torment? It is the derivative of a plan that is, guess what? The propositioned plan of God. Because anytime you're trying to plan a route for your life and it is not in alignment with the route and the plan of God, it is called a systematic self-torment. So I need you to get that. You know, I set up and when I was young, I met a man. I thought I saw a halo over his head like they talk about it in the movies. And I decided to give my all to the consciousness of that man who didn't even want me. I mean, let's keep it real, people. But guess what I was doing? I made up a story of mine own without the consideration of that person's mind and their heart and their soul. This is what we have a lot of people out here doing. Because we're expecting people to finish the book that we have to write for our lives. And you know what? I had to realize that I didn't have a right to his love. I didn't have a right to the story. Because it was a story that was of a pseudo-based representation of who I was. And that's why it never came into fruition. Because I made up a story that was not the truth of who I was. And any other story that I made up that was not aligned with the will of God made manifest in me for the pursuit of his will for my life, which is my destiny and my purpose and my will and my power and my strength and my tenacity and my I ams and my truth and my consciousness and my psyche. All of that I have to obtain through the sovereignty of God. But that's what we do, right? We make up a story and then we plan it out. You know, people are about psychological business plans. That's right, psychological business plans. Because everybody's got everything all written out, right? Documented in your psyche about how things are supposed to go. Well, I've got news for you. That's not going to happen because that plan is the doctrine of Satan. And that's why that happened to me. And you know what you'll be doing? You'll sit there and you'll wait. And you'll wait. Wasting precious years and precious hours of your time trying to force not only yourself but others to complete a book and complete a plan that was never going to happen in the first place. Now, that right there can speak to the rest of it. But I don't want to go, get all into all of that and take too much time. But I just wanted to give an example. Because we have to be careful about where we're putting our love and where we're depositing our love. And we have to be careful about where we're depositing our time. Because as I told you, it is loaned to us. And I want to ask you a couple questions. Do you love yourself? Are you spending time with yourself? Are you asking God for an allotment into an awareness, which would be the unsearchable realms of God, for the pursuit of your life? Are you asking God for the scripts and the chapters of his book? Because if not, then we're in the process, my dear friends, of systematic self-torment. And so let's move on to next number 2 of the experience of the self-victimization. And that is going to be and when we get to the point of the spiritual castigating of our spirit. So it's the spiritual castigating. And what is spiritual castigating? It is severe self-reproach and the censoring of the needs of our soul. So what he is attempting to do through the spiritual castigating, he is attempting to literally leave us lying on the ground in the pursuit of crawling ourselves into a ditch and into the ground, practicing self-reproach. And then once we get to the self-reproach, we are literally we're literally in the area of where we are censoring the needs of our soul. So what are we doing when we're censoring the needs of our soul? We are basically hiding what the soul needs so that the soul won't be able to feed the spirit what it needs. So if we're in the face of self-reproach, which would be thus hating ourselves, we have to understand that we are now in the business of censoring the needs of our soul. We are hiding from ourselves. So we are covering the needs of our soul in order to hide what we need from the spirit. So I need you to see how powerful this is in this hour. So, and then that's the next part. And then the next part, in after the castigating of our spirits, he is in the process of spiritual upbraiding. And what is spiritual upbraiding? It is the experience of us, no matter what we do, and no matter what we achieve, no matter how far we get in life, no matter, whether we have a good relationship with our friends or family or not, whether or not we feel like we're happy or content or without the ego, whatever the case, we are continuously in the process of finding fault in ourselves. It's all about finding fault, because remember, this is the part of the journey that we are facing the persecution of Satan, which is the persecution of ourselves, thus being the spirit of persecution. And I just want to touch base to make sure if anybody that's watching that doesn't know where we're at, we are on PC number 2, which is the self-victimization of ourselves. And we are at number 3 of that experience, which is the spiritual upbraiding, which is the continual finding of fault within ourselves. So here's about the business at this point of the journey, which is the self-victimization. Here's about the business of attacking us with systematic self-torment. And then after he is about the business of betwixt us with systematic self-torment, he is then about the business of spiritually castigating us, which is the severity of the self-reproach that we face, and then the censoring of the needs of our soul, which then therefore hinders the needs of our spirit. And then he is about the business of spiritual upbraiding. And when he spiritually upbraids us, we are then continually in our psyche, no matter what we do or what we achieve, finding fault within ourselves. And then let's move on to the paramount constituent, number 3, which is going to be the crucifixion of our spirits. So he is about the business now, once he has done all of this, crucifying us in the spirit. And what I mean by crucifying us in the spirit, it is Satan's attempt, basically, to kill us off. It is Satan's attempt to kill us off. Let me press this computer. And not only is it Satan's attempt to kill us off, but it is also his way of killing us off is articulated by the spirit, which is basically killing off our spirit. And then he is going to do that by way of binding up the mind, the binding up of the mind. Let me repeat that, the binding up of the mind. He is about the business of betwixting everything internally and then binding up the mind. So he, that means sewing up the mind, basically. If you can just picture yourself taking your brain and then putting it under a sewing machine and then allowing the sewing machine to run and then sewing up every area of your brain to the point where your cerebral cortex can't move. It cannot shift. Your left lobe is now on the right lobe, and your right lobe is now on the left lobe. Your frontal lobe cannot even think for you. Because Satan now at this point is in the business of the binding of your mind. He is sewing up your brain. For a layman's term perspective. And so, once he does that, he is going to bind up your body. And what does our body experience? Our labor. So now it's to the point where we can't even fend for ourselves. That's why you have a lot of people feel like, oh, I just can't make it to work. And I'm just having such a hard time at work. Or I'm experiencing so many problems with the people at work. And the enemy is working against me. Why is everybody down talking me? Why are people gossiping about me? Why is it not working out on this job? And I have to quit that job. And then go to another job. And then you get to that job and that job won't work. Because he's trying to bind up your labor. And what is he doing if he binds up your labor? He is then bearing up the fruits thereof of your labor. So now you're at the point where your psyche is all messed up. Now he's attacking your labor. So now you can't even work in peace. You can't even work in peace. And then once he binds up the labor, he is then about the business of binding up the soul. And that's when we get to the self-induced torment. As we were talking about in PC2. That he is utilizing the self-induced torment, the self-torment that we are continuing to give ourselves and administer to ourselves. He is using the psyche, the body, and the soul to bind you up and keep you in a perpetual torture. Okay, and let's move on, because let me check the time here. And I don't want to take too much time. But we want to get to number 4 of the number 4 of the PCs for this series, which is going to be the paramount constituents. And this is number 4. Each area of penetration should have 5. And this is number 4 of this area of penetration, which is the spirit of persecution. And we are talking in terms of the spiritually reposed and comeuppance. So at part 4, which is paramount constituent, number 4, he is now about the business of getting you spiritually reposed and comeuppance. And what's happening, number 1, with that experience and this journey is the fact that it is the pivotal point of the journey of the spiritual confinement that we have allowed Satan to situate and therefore keep us in the remains of apprehension. So he's about the business of keeping us apprehended from ourselves. So he is about the business of keeping us confined and apprehended in an apprehended state. And then once he keeps us in an apprehended state, he is then about the business at this phase of the journey of giving us the experience of the continual feeling that we will never achieve or obtain what we deserve. Thus, the subconscious belief that our fate lies in the doctrine of Satan. So let's hear that again, because I did create this material and these are from my notes. And so number 2 of having us spiritually repose in comeuppance is the fact that he is in the business of us having the continual feeling that we will never achieve what we want or obtain what we deserve. So that's why we have a lot of people out here. And as I always say, including myself, at whatever point, that believe that whatever we do, we're never going to amount to anything. Because at this point, we're nobody, right? No matter what we do, it's never going to be good enough. No matter how we reinvent ourselves, we're never going to look good enough. We're never going to fit in well enough. We're never going to be pretty enough. We're never going to be handsome enough. We're never going to talk well enough. We're never going to read good enough. We're never going to work good enough. We're never going to make the money we want to make. We're never going to see or do the things we want to do. We're never going to amount to what we expect, and we're never going to obtain what we believe we are supposed to obtain, thus never achieving the amount of success that we are due to achieve. So he is getting us in the point where we literally are faithless. And so I have to get you to understand that point. And then once he depletes our faith and depletes us from the belief in what we can produce for ourselves, he is then taking us to PC number 5, which is the paramount constituent, and that is to be spiritually broken. Now we are spiritually broken. So this is the phase of the persecution that we face from Satan, which is thus from ourselves. Because I don't need to state to you at this point that everything that's happening, we are doing to ourselves. And it is coming directly from the womb of Satan. And now we are at the point where we are literally spiritually broken. And I want to get totally, completely transparent about what's happening now at this point of the journey. Because once we become spiritually broken inside ourselves, we are at that point, number 1, spiritually facing damnation. So we're facing damnation, and then we're going to be having feelings of eternal punishment. So we're in the business now of damning our own selves, and then feeling continuously that we need to be punished for how we're choosing to live our lives and who we've become and who we are as it relates to the pseudo-based representation of ourselves. Thus, us being in the spiritual confinement experience and the spiritual confinement series. We are in the business of being in the throes of that, which is propelling out of that experience. But as it relates to us being in the experience now, we are about the business now where we are, Satan is about the business of getting us to the point now where we are spiritually broken and we are in the business of damning ourselves and punishing ourselves. Punishing ourselves in the mind, punishing ourselves in the body. That's why we can't ever seem to get control over our weight. That's why we can't ever seem to get control over our minds. We're always all over the place. We can't never get a control over what we decide to do or what we don't decide to do. We can never get control over anything because we're continuously punishing ourselves. And whatever we do is going to still be the wrong decision as far as what we believe. And that's why we're now at the point where we can't even see our ways out. And so once we get through the damnation and the punishment, then we start experiencing the anger about ourselves and about our lives, because now we're angry because we aren't doing the work and we aren't getting ourselves to a place where we are requiring ourselves to love ourselves back to life. And since we won't require that we do that, we are literally, anger is filled within us. We are literally living in the spirit of anger. And then what happens after anger? We become bitter. Internally bitter, and bitter towards everything and everyone around us, including the people that we so-called love. And then what happens after we become bitter? We become frustrated. So the spirit of frustration hits us. And then after we become frustrated, we are filled with the spirit of brokenness. Like as if we are incorrectable. We can't be fixed. We can't be worked on. We can't learn anything else. We can't find out anything else. We can't search for meaning. We can't see ourselves out. That's what happens when we're in complete brokenness, because there is no vision of hope. And then once there's no vision of hope and we're in complete brokenness, as I said, now we have come through the experience, the spiritual experience of the damnation and the punishment and the anger and the frustration and the brokenness and the bitterness. And once we experience all of that, we are ultimately going to end up in anguish. We are in anguish because we are in self-persecution. We are in self-persecution. And if we allow Satan to continue in his pursuit to persecute us for who we are and what we are, where we've been, where we are, and where we're in pursuit to, we are going to end up in doom. My God. And if we end up in doom, what are we ending up in? The quietus. And what is the quietus? It is the self-induced pain that is now causing our spirit to die within us. It is causing our spirit to die. It is literally the belief of death in spirit from the experience of the destruction of our spirit prior in the journey with God, thus the plight and the fight of the enemy. So we have to understand that this is very systematic in the doctrine of Lucifer. So he is in the business of destroying us, and then us eventually dying in the spirit, which is the whole business of the pursuit of the persecution. And that's why this is so serious for anybody out there that's feeling like they don't understand why they're going through what they're going through. And they don't understand the severity of the mental torment and the mental distortion of the spirit that we are facing as it relates to the spirit realm. These are the reasons why these are happening. These things are happening to us. And that's why God is about the business now of opening a portal into a consciousness that we had not seen before, so that he can lead us into the areas of where Satan is trying to hinder us. He is about the business of giving us an intellect of how to fight and how to get ourselves to a place of completeness and wholeness by getting an understanding of our spirit. I hear a lot of people talking about conclusions and reasonings behind, but we're talking about a spiritual truth. I'm about the business of getting us a spiritual truth. And then once we gain a spiritual truth, we are understanding that we are in the journeys of God. And if we are in the journeys of God, my dear friends, we have to understand that we are in the fight of the enemy. And we have to understand that everything that's occurring to us has a deeper meaning because it is seated in the roots of principalities. There are regions that we cannot see. And for everything that we face, there is a spiritual authority that is residing over it. And that's why we are in the business of getting through now. Not just experiencing now, but getting through what we're really going through. And getting through the days and the hours when we sit alone and we get away from the presence of people. And we get away from the presence of work. And we get away from the presence of whatever it is that we do. And we sit alone with ourselves. And we can't even live with who we are in the spirit internally. I'm talking about that now. I'm talking about the real experience of who we are. And that's why I'm on here and on this broadcast. And so, my dear friends, it's imperative that we really decipher what's going on in the spirit realm. And that's why this series is so important to me. And this has been part 2. An installment 2 of the Spiritual Confinement series. And it is on the spirit of persecution. And just to break that down further, we have our PCs, which is number 1, the oppressional control. Number 2, the self-victimization of ourselves. Number 3, the crucifixion of our spirits. That's number 3, the crucifixion of our spirits. Number 4, when we become spiritually reposed in comeuppance. And then number 5, when we are spiritually broken. And thus being in the face of anguish and doom. And so, my dear friends, I'm so glad that I'm able to get on and broadcast this series for you. Because it is imperative that we get about the business of gaining a real understanding of what we're going through. And a real truth about how we feel and the emotions that we're fighting. Not just a reasoning. And a reasoning from the earth realm. And people telling us, well, it'll be all right and it'll be just fine. Well, no, it won't be just fine. And what about the days when we don't feel like going forward? Who's going to talk about that? What if you can't get over it? I'm talking to the people right there. They want a real answer. And they want somebody to be real about who they are. And sit in front of you with the truth. And that's what I'm about the business of doing. And so, my dear friends, I love you with the love of the Lord. And I definitely appreciate your time with me and your time that you're spending watching this televised program. And I'm going to leave you with that. I definitely appreciate your time. Once again, this is the Burning Power Show. And this is where you are therefore required to love yourself. And this is where you are required to want yourself. And this is where you're required to need yourself and trust yourself. And there is a real experience for you. And there is a real knowledge for you. You just have to be willing to do the work required in order to get there. And I'm talking the experience of getting through the mazes of the enemy. And through the mazes of the heart and the mazes of the spirit realm. in order for us to decipher exactly where we're going and what's happening to us right now, in this very hour, in this very minute, of every second that we breathe. And realizing the fact that the time that we have on earth is long to us. And we have to get about the business of doing what we need to do for ourselves first, so that we can get whole and healthy and be about the business of representing God. And once we start representing God, we would know that we're in the pursuit of what we're supposed to be doing. And so I want to leave you with that tonight. The computer is acting all funny tonight, so I won't be ending it with music tonight. But I do love you. And I will be talking to you guys soon. I'll be getting on soon to do part 3, which will be the area of penetration, part 3 of the spiritual confinement series. And that is going to be on the spirit of soul thirsting. So that is going to be part 3 of the series. And I'll be getting on soon to do that once I've finished preparing the intellectual material that we need in order to get through the journey. But once again, this is the Burning Power Show, and this is Dr. Sonny Alonzo Dotson. I appreciate your time, and I appreciate you, if nobody else does. And you have the love that I have in my heart, even if you feel like you don't have any in yours, and nobody else cares. I care. And this is home to where you're welcome. I thank you, and I'll see you soon. You are watching The Burning Power Show with Dr. Sonny Alonzo Dotson, where you are therefore required to love yourself. You are welcome here, you are wanted here, and you are needed here. And to the very last ember that's been diluted in the airs of possibility, trust yourself, need yourself,